Mark today.
Well, it's you know, the whole experience has been fascinating, really. I think that's recording. Pause
Yeah,
recording.
it is.
Stop
It
recording.
asked
Good.
us,
Jolly good. Okay,
confirmed
right.
that we were recording.
I'm going to start. And
Now,
This theater.
mute the mics. Mute the mics.
yes, I'll mute the mics. I will actually ask you later to unmute all your mics, but that's a different story. So let's close down anything I don't want running. Right. So let's mute everybody. Mute all. Yes. Okay, so you should be able to hear me still, and I'm going to begin.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So thank you everyone for coming, and it's nice to be able to share my thoughts about partly about the discussions that have been happening in Anpa so far, but also to talk about some work which I've been doing mostly around music and thinking about how music works, but also to reflect on contributions of people who've attended this week and people who are here. So I've been very influenced by John Talday's work on physiology and the relationship between physiology and consciousness and its relationship to history. And I've also been very influenced by Lotte Leidersdorf, who came to Joseph's talk on Wednesday. And I want to, first of all, refer to the work of a man called Andrew Pickering, who wrote a wonderful book called The Cybernetic Brain. And this is a book about the British cybernetician. So this is Gordon Pask. And I suppose one of the great revelations of Anpa this year for me has been the centrality of Gordon Pask in the early thinking that went into Anpa, his work with Ted Bastin, and clearly he was heavily involved in some of these sort of foundational ideas of the combinatorial hierarchy. And as soon as the Stafford Beer archive, which is in Liverpool, is reopened again, I'm going to dig through the papers that are there to find out if there's anything about Gordon's work with Ted Bastin. And Stafford Beer himself, of course, it also features in Pickering's book. And Beer is also somebody who I think would be very much in tune with many of the discussions that we're having here. But I want to particularly think about this phrase, ontological theatre. Now, this is Pickering's phrase to describe what he thought the British cyberneticians, particularly the British cyberneticians, were doing. And fundamentally, it was a joint activity where, on the one hand, they were making machines, they were making crazy bits of kit out of, well, exactly what Mike was describing, out of servo mechanisms and all sorts of bits of ex-war stuff, and they were putting it together in all sorts of weird ways. This picture here is an art exhibit which Gordon Pask designed for the ICA exhibition in 1968 called Cybernetic Serendipity. And Paul Pangaro, who was one of Pask's research, one of Pask's students, has recently recreated this thing. And my last lockdown trip before you couldn't go anywhere was to go to Paris, to the Pompidou Center, where this recreation of this particular exhibit was on show, and it was amazing. And Andrew Pickering was there to talk about cybernetics and how important cybernetics is, particularly in the context of some of the madness that we currently see in technology with our sort of drive towards artificial intelligence and some of the problems which are associated with that. But the point about these people was that they were actively engaged in an inquiry into nature by making machines and playing with machines and observing what happened with these machines and devices, and then observing how their own reactions, their own reflective processes. And I suppose that process is best summarized by Ross Ashby, who was another of the British cyberneticians, perhaps the most important one in many ways. And he described what the cybernetic science really was, which was to make observations of what you expected to happen but didn't. So you form a set of expectations about what you think ought to happen, and then you make observations about what didn't happen. So it's always driven towards error. It's always driven towards observing things that confound your expectations. So you're always in this dynamic relation with the natural world. Now, the other person who's really influenced me is David Bohm. And I was particularly interested in the fact that Lou drew our attention to this book, which was edited by Ted Bastin. And Bohm has got 2 papers in there. And the first of those papers I'm going to talk about in a second, because I think that there are some very important things in there. But Bohm picks up on this theatrical metaphor, and he points out that the root of the word theory is Greek theoria, and it's the same word as theatre. And this leads him to say, and there's a video of him saying it, theory is a theatre of the mind. And I suppose that's something which I've really been reflecting on as I've been listening to the presentations up to this point, because in a certain sense, we're all putting on a show, and to another extent, we all believe that our show is the only show in town. And I think that's interesting, because we're also rationally, we know that it isn't. And there's a whole process of how, not just the ideas that we have, our mental ideas about our own show, and how, you know, we think that's very important, but also the way our ideas interact with one another, and how we interact with one another. And this is the point that Bohm makes in the first of the papers in this Quantum Theory and Beyond book. Now, this was the result of a colloquium, so I'm guessing it was a very Anpa-like event in 1971. So, you know, it's a long time, nearly 50 years ago. And the point that he made, he wrote this little paper about about Bohr. And he said the most interesting thing about Bohr was, sorry, I just have to move the Zoom thing out of the way there. One of his most important contributions is that he saw, at least implicitly, that the form of a coherent communication has to be in harmony with its content. The form of a coherent communication has to be in harmony with its content. For example, if someone shouts, "Be quiet," the noisy, angry, and turbulent form of such speech excites and stirs up the hearer. And this evidently interferes with the communication of the intended content, which is the need for a situation of peace and calmness, obviously. Now, I think my interpretation of that is also to add, really, that this coherence between form and content happens over time. It's a process. It's almost a theatrical engagement. And it must involve the interaction between many parameters and many different levels of recursion. So, of course, you know, at the bottom, it's probably atoms and quarks and space and time and all of that stuff. But clearly it can't be anything if it doesn't also involve physiology, if it doesn't involve consciousness, and so on, if it doesn't involve communication, all of these parameters. So the question is, how is this coherence established between all these very many parameters that are involved in that process? How do we even conceive of that process? Now, I suppose one of the key things, and Nicola said it yesterday, yes, it does feel that things are coming together at Anpa, but it did lead me to think, okay, so what is coming together exactly? And I thought actually this picture was quite interesting, because it's one of those classic things where you see an emergent pattern. And you kind of think, well, what do I see? Do I see lots of people with their hands joined up, or do I see lots of blue sky and particular compartments of that blue sky? It's the same thing, you know, you look at your hand and do you see four fingers and a thumb, or do you see four spaces? It's that sort of figure and ground question. So there's a question, you know, what is coming together? Now, I think perhaps one of the most important things that's coming together is this emphasis on ground, and particularly the what's in between. What is the space in between? What is the space that marks out, delimits the pattern? And it seems to be nothing. Nothing seems to be the thing that is demarcating the pattern. And that seems to be a very profound thing. So maybe that's got something to do with what is coming together here. I had to make a Liverpool reference as well. So what is coming together? What is it that is in the process where somehow we feel at one with each other and at one with the universe? And when we see or we get a glimpse of something that we recognize in some way to be true, what is that process? Is it triangulation? Is it, you know, that we've got parameters A, B, and C, and there's some point of intersection between all of them? Is that coming together? Is the coming together in the middle of A intersection B intersection C? But the thing is that everybody believes that they're in the middle. We all see ourselves from this central point. We all see ourselves at the center of our own universe. And we can't all be in the same center. There seems to be some kind of dynamic process of interaction. And it's a dynamic process of interaction between all of the variables that are involved. It's not just between A, B, and C, but you've got to consider the interactions between A and B, A and C, B and C, A, B, and C together. It's all of those interactions. And I suppose one of the things I've come to appreciate over the last couple of weeks is a certain similarity between this way of thinking, the way of thinking of Peter Rowlands, who has really changed my life in the way that I think about some of this stuff, and really opened up very powerful new avenues for me, and I'm sure for many other people here too. But the similarity between that and some of the thinking that was going on by Ted Bastin and the founders of Anpa in their thinking about the combinatorial hierarchy, this whole business of how do you generate a universe from nothing. So I wonder if coming together must be some process of interaction which produces stability, which produces some, maybe stability is the wrong word, but it's something where every parameter is constraining every other parameter, and every parameter is both interacting with every other parameter. So there's some sort of exchange going on, and there's also constraint. There's also some sort of interference. But the totality means that they give rise to growth and life together. And I think if we feel things are coming together, we feel that there is some sense of growth and life in the discussions that we're having between us over these weeks. And it's wonderful. I'd never have imagined that sitting in front of my computer could be so rewarding. I want to mention this whole business of interaction versus mutual constraint, because it's very much underpins some work that I've done with Leidersdorf. And Leidersdorf was very influenced by Robert Ilanovich, an ecologist who also is part of the Foundations of Information Science list. And Ilanovich talks about this balance between constraint and interaction. He talks about, on the one hand, there's a process of mutual information, because he refers to this in terms of Shannon entropy. He talks about mutual information going one way, and then a sort of, he talks about an autocatalytic process going in the other way. So there's a process which is, on the one hand, selecting and attenuating, that's the mutual information process, and going the other way, there's this amplifying process, this autocatalytic process of generating new options. And these are working hand in hand. And the way I think about it is I think about swamps and how, you know, you can imagine a very small animal surviving in a swamp, like a spider. So a swamp is a very high, I say high entropy, I would say high variety environment, but it's very complex environment for any organism to survive in. And one of the problems is that, you know, a high variety environment somehow has to be managed by any organism which doesn't have that amount of variety, that amount of complexity. So, you know, here you've got your organism, it's less complex, there's lower entropy within the spider. How does it engage with its environment? Well, one of the things that it has to do is it has to decide what information from my environment do I think is relevant to me? How do I select the information in the environment? I have to use my spider sense, sorry about the pun, but I have to use my spider sense to identify which information from the environment is important to me. But that's not enough, because if you just attenuate, if you just identify which information from the environment is going to be important to you, you have no way of being able to check if your judgments about the important information are right or not. You've got to be able to engage back with the environment to identify if you're actually going to be able to survive in it. And you can think, I mean, spiders are nice because they provide this wonderful example of amplifying what they know. And one of the things that they know is how to spin a web. And in a sense, the web is an epitome of in what information theory we would call redundancy. It's this sort of generation, this amplification of a simple principle in a variety of different ways. And in the process, of course, it creates a niche for itself. And it's in this sort of dual process of, on the one hand, making selections of information from the environment, and then amplifying, generating redundancy, generating options within that environment, that it's able to survive. And I think in many ways, this is ontological theatre. This is the process of the cyberneticians were doing. They were sort of selecting things in the natural environment which they thought were interesting and which they could codify. And then they were creating machines which were effectively generating redundancy. It was generating possibilities and allowing them to explore particular sort of niches of inquiry. And I think that relationship sort of maps over there, really. This is a multi-dimensional issue, really. And if you think about the different parameters, if we're talking about the range of parameters, the range of signals, the range of information that we have to process, it comes from the very lowest stuff. So Peter's mass, time, space, and charge, absolutely. And what have we got to think about there? Well, it's about nil potency, quaternions, and broken symmetry particularly because that seems to run through everything else. And then you can go up to the level of cells, and you can think, okay, so the parameters of cellular organization, well, John would tell us that we have to consider the way the cell gains energy from its environment, this chemiosmosis process, the way the cell creates order within itself, the Schrodinger negentropy process, and the way that it establishes some sort of homeostatic relationship with its environment. You can go up from cells and look at people. So what do? Well, we need to get energy. We need to get energy in the form of food. So this is an important parameter for us, of course, otherwise we'd starve. We need to create order. We certainly do we probably need to create order. We have thought and creativity and communication and all sorts of things that we do in our order creating processes. And we need to maintain our viability as individuals within our own niches, within whether it's the homes that we're living in, or the jobs that we're doing, or the society that we're surviving in, and so on. And, you know, you can look at groups of people and look at institutions and say, okay, well, institutions, perhaps if people need food, institutions need funding. Institutions need ways of actually effectively resourcing themselves to maintain their functions. They need to create orders in terms of structures and you know, hierarchies, and well, sometimes perhaps arguably hierarchies. And they need to maintain their viability within their community. And you can go all the way up and look at society in terms of managing the health of the economy, creating order through fairness and justice and law, and maintaining a social viability. Perhaps that entails looking after the planet, which of course we're not doing very well at the moment. But these are all the parameters, and it's overwhelming. So you think, you know, how, if you think about that whole process that I've just had in the previous slide, so where are the selections made? Where is the redundancy generated? How are the two processes coordinated? These are important questions. And again, it comes back to how is it that we relate our processes of identifying patterns and selecting important things at a physical level, and how do we relate that to doing that in social life, in our institutions and so on? I think, but these things connected? They must be connected. So this is a diagram which I use to describe the process of communication in music, but I think it's more generally applicable. And really, there are three levels of trying to describe how it is that we establish what matters. We establish meaning within our environment. And to some extent, well, no, to an important extent, that also involves anticipating things that are happening around us. So somehow we're able to construct our selection mechanism to identify what's important, what matters, what's meaningful. Now, the three layers here, and at the bottom is this a shared environment of differences, this sort of the noise of just living. The you know, the noise, we're going to make a lot of noise in a minute, but the noise of our physiology, the noise of our social environment, the noise of the TV, the computer, the notifications coming on our phone, all of that stuff. It's all, in that sense, it's all noise, but it can be measured in the sense that everything has a pattern of surprisingness. You know, whether it's the voice, the words that I'm using to speak to you, the tone of my voice, everything, you can look at each of these dimensions and say, okay, well, there are patterns of surprisingness there, which we can model to some extent with Shannon equations. But if you take that as the lowest level, of course, we're not stupid. We discern in that sort of spectrum of vivid sense impressions, we discern certain patterns, and we use those certain patterns to infer that perhaps certain things might be about to happen. And so we're always in the process of constructing some kind of anticipatory model on the basis of the things that are occurring through as we experience the world. But the challenge is, of course, that there are many possible anticipatory models. It's not just one, it's many, and it really depends on which parameters you're listening to. So the top level selection process here I've got is that somehow we have to look at which of the models that we can possibly create, which ones fit, which ones are meaningful, which ones actually provide a useful guide. And so these three processes, they're all processes of selection at some level, but they're all geared towards trying to help us construct a mechanism to select our effective coordination in our daily life. And I think one way of saying that, another way of saying that, is really, you know, the selection that's going on is the selection of what's meaningful. Now, this three-layer model is actually derived from the work of Daniel Dubois, and he talks about the sort of different selection operations, and he developed his theory through the biological work of Robert Rosen, whose student he was. But I think it's very interesting that we see this sort of leveled patterns of systemic interrelationship. We see that in a number of different ideas that come out of cybernetics and systems theory, and you know, a lot of this stuff seems to resonate across the piece. I thought I'd put a biblical quote in. I think this is interesting because so this is St. Paul. I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth unto those things which are before. It's a message about looking forwards with humility, really. And I think we do this, but at the same time, there's something deep in us which guides us. And I think, I don't know, is that in the different recursions, all of the different parameters that are we're sort of swimming in all the time? I think it might be. Maybe this is a diagrammatic representation of the same thing. So how do we steer our pressing on? How do we steer our selection of meaning? In a sense, if I'm an observer in the middle here, and all of the different parameters, all of the different constraints belong to all of those categories that I've just mentioned. You know, there's mass, time, space and charge, cells, people, institutions, and all the way going back into history. Everything has its history, and every moment of history is somehow a constraining parameter on our present, the present state of our constructing a selection mechanism for projecting towards the future. And this is the question for me. I hope it's a clear question, but the question at the bottom: how is our selection mechanism constructed? That's it. That's the question. I was wondering whether the process by which our selection mechanism is constructed is rather like the process of being aware of a set of variations of the same thing. So in a way, it is all about redundancy. It is all about different representations of the same thing. David Bohm makes a very similar point, in the sense that he says, well, you've got all these different descriptions of an object. You know, you can look at a circle, you look at it at an angle, it's an ellipse. You then look at it in more detail. The physicist will tell you it's not really a circle, it's a load of atoms, and so on. You go in, you get all of these different descriptions. They are all about the same thing, but somehow they overlay one another. And I suppose the question is whether there is an interference pattern, whether the mechanism for selecting meaning is a kind of interference pattern between different descriptions of reality. And it produces a fractal. It's very interesting that Bohm, in Wholeness and the Implicate Order, they didn't know about fractals then. So they talk about holograms, but holograms are effectively, you know, they're fractal. And the fractal is produced by a combination of patterns of mutual interaction and mutual constraint. And in the case of a physical light hologram, what have you got? You've got space and time. and through the interference between different frequencies, the space and time interference pattern encodes the object. And I think that metaphor is very powerful. I'm going to show a demonstration of something which I think is doing something similar at a broader level using Shannon entropy in a second. I was thinking, though, that this whole business of themes and variations, just to give a quick example. So I've been playing through some variations recently, and I'm hoping you can hear the piano. Let's oops, let's just go back there for a second. So this is Rachmaninoff. I hope you can hear me. So this is a theme. Now, he constructs a whole piece, like a lot of composers, he constructs a whole piece out of this. So we get another variation. It's the same tune, but there's something about what's happening in the spaces between these different variations which drives the whole thing to its conclusion. So it goes on like that, and then eventually we end up with something completely different and yet the same. And that's the point. It's completely different and yet it's the same. So what's happening here? It's this. Where is the essence of the thing? Well, it's in the spaces. Let's just find. So eventually we end up in a different key, but it's the same tune. And then we end up, this is completely different. This is a different world, and yet it's the same tune. Okay, so I suppose putting all of this together, this is where my interest in music and my interest in physics and my interest in Peter's work and my interest in John Torday's work, this is where it seems to be all coming together for me. There's that whole thing about coming together again. Now, just to return to the business of anticipation and really to have a think about Peter's work, Daniel Dubois has done a lot of work on anticipatory systems and computing anticipatory systems. And it struck me that in this work, there were ways in which it could be combined with Peter's, what Peter calls his nilpotent rewrite system. So if we've got three parameters, A, B, and C, we can also consider A, B, A, C, B, C, A, B, C. But in order for there to be a pattern, and the whole thing has to have a pattern, because the Dubois' anticipatory system is basically a fractal, and fractals have a pattern, and that's how it works. So there's one set of experiences at one level, which have the same pattern as a set of experiences that you might anticipate to happen with a different set of parameters in the future. So you've got to have nothing. So in order to have nothing, there have to be these complementary parameters, not A, not B, not C, not AB, not BC, not C, and so on, okay, which effectively cancel out. And I think it's this cancelling out, which is so important in so many of the phenomena that we experience. And I think particularly within music, this is important. That music somehow seems to be driven by a force to drive it towards silence. So this is Peter's working out of his rewrite system, and this is exactly the complementary pairs of variables. And I've just written, in fact, we're just about to publish a paper in Systems Research and Behavioral Science with Lotte Leidersdorf, looking at variables in music and combining Dubois' idea of anticipatory systems with Peter Rowland's rewrite system, analyzing the parameters in music. And really the conclusion of this is that music is somehow driven towards anticipating that its next moment is silence. It disappears. It's very, Andrew said something very similar the other day, and I think this is correct. We spent a lot of time between us talking about this. And in the analysis that I did in music, we looked at the notes of, this was a particular piece of Bach. I presented on this at Anpa last year, and looked at the changes in entropy over time of the different voices, and then plotted them like this, but not just looked at the individual voices, which you can imagine are, you know, they're A, B, C, there are actually 6 parameters here, A, B, C, D, E, F, but then to look at the interaction between all of those parameters and produce a kind of fractal pattern out of it, and then to examine that fractal pattern against the experience of the music. And you know, this is interesting, not just because you can identify patterns in the fractal, but also you can then speculate, okay, so what other variables are involved in this process? What about the physiology of the players? What about the all the glances and sort of tacit communications that are going on between them? All of those things have entropies too. All of those things must also enter into this interference pattern, which produces the silence that eventually results. How does that work? Now, I've got a little demonstration here. I've got 2 demonstrations I want to do with you. One is going to obviously involve you making some sound, but I want to show you this one first. So the work that I did on music, after I presented it, I had a brief discussion with Lou afterwards, and he said, he explained to me his favorite doodle. And his favorite doodle was, well, I'll describe it now. Let me find my browser and I'll show you. So he explained to me his favorite doodle was basically starting on a piece of paper, and you start to draw and you wiggle around. Now, have a look at what the graphs are doing as I'm doing this, because what they're doing is looking at the entropy of my mouse drawing this figure. And eventually you come around to all of this stuff, and I'm going to sort of, well, maybe I'm going to go over here a bit and do something a bit wild. But eventually, I'm going to return to where I started. But I'm not going to do it just yet. I'm just going to keep going. And you can see that the different parameters that I'm plotting are dancing against each other as I'm doing this. And I'm going to stop in a minute. Maybe it is exactly like music in a way, because the suspense of actually deciding when it is you're going to finish seems very similar. And I produced a pattern.
It's like improvising a line in music.
Yes, it's exactly like that. It's exactly like that. And I'm very pleased, because I've only just got this program to work in real time, so I'm quite happy about that. But my next job is to actually do the same thing with music. We can do the same thing with text and so on. So this, you know, this is, what have we got here? Well, we've got 2 different descriptions. 2 different descriptions. We've got the description, 3 different descriptions. We've got the picture. We've got the graph of the different entropies. It's a very simple entropy calculation. It's basically the entropy of X and Y and the entropy of the length of the line that I'm drawing. So if I suddenly sort of draw very fast, then that you'll see a different pattern there. And at the bottom, this is a kind of fractal picture. So there are pairs of values here. So I've got my, the three parameters. So I've got my A, which is X for the first two, B, which is Y for the second, and then C, which is the length of the line. And then the rest of them are AB, AC, C, whichever one, CA, and then ABC. So it's exactly the same thing. And it looks messy and it looks, but the point is, and this is only one possible pattern that you can generate out of this. So what if you took different values of entropy, you get a different pattern. And then if you go back to the Daniel Dubois idea that actually the top level of selection, this level of selection here, where is it? Is actually selecting, okay, so we can generate all of these different patterns. Which one is the one that fits? Which is the one that we're going to select as our guide for what is meaningful? Okay, so that's really what I'm thinking as I'm doing this mad stuff, but I'm really grateful for the suggestion because it's, and I've literally only just done it. Okay, so let's go back to my slides, and I don't want to run out of time, but I think there's something very interesting here about holes and the way we make distinctions, and the importance of anticipation in this process is something which I'm now puzzling about, because we talk about making a distinction. In Spencer Brown, we make a distinction, but and you sort of you draw the mark. And within the mark, of course, there's uncertainty, because how do you decide what's inside or outside the distinction? And that means that you have to have some kind of meta system which is mopping up that uncertainty, which is managing that uncertainty. But the meta system must then also be aware, because it's outside the distinction, it must also be aware that there must be a balance between whatever's outside the mark and what's inside it. So there must be interaction and balance between the external environment and the internal environment to actually maintain that distinction. And I've just suggested here, this is a shared epigenetic environment. I think it must be. We're engaging in our somatic development. We're engaging with all sorts of factors which are affecting the development of our cells, all those levels of recursion which have to be considered in our ontogeny. Now, how's that process managed? Well, there must be, actually the meta system must break down. On the one hand, you've got some sort of internal management of the uncertainty within the distinction, but then you've also got to balance that with how the world is changing outside. So there must be a balance there, and those things must be held in relation, and there must be a steering mechanism which is keeping that together. Now, this is very close to Stafford Beer's viable system model, and it does lead me to think that when Beer encountered Spencer Brown's ideas, he recognized something that he'd been thinking about himself for some time. I really wonder about that now. I just think there was a recognition. It wasn't that Spencer Brown was bringing something new. He was amplifying something that Beer had already perceived somehow. And of course, the missing dimension here is it's not just one person, it's a whole load of people, and we're all doing it, and we're doing it together. Now, which comes first, the distinction or the anticipation? It must all come at the same time. Now, the other thing is that Nicholas Luhmann makes the claim, and I think this is very interesting too, that in making a distinction, we generate time. So the anticipatory system is not even, you can't even conceive of it anticipating what's happening in the future. It is actually inventing the future and inventing the past, and because it has to in order to maintain the distinction. So, and I have a question for Lou as to whether he's partly responsible for influencing Luhmann in thinking like this, but maybe we can talk about that later. Okay, so that's
Irresponsible for whom?
Or Luhmann. The Luhmann's thinking about.
Spencer Brown is responsible for Luhmann's thinking very, very strongly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I think these are important questions about anticipation, about the nature of time, and whether time is something that we are it's a parameter. It's exactly what Peter says. It's a parameter, and it shifts. The parameters move around, and we find ourselves swimming in the world that we do. Now, this is my last slide, and then we're going to do a performance. Have we got time? Yes. There were some very interesting comments a couple of days ago about the implicate and the explicate order. And I think Lou made this comment: the way to understand the bridging of the implicate and explicate is to look at the many examples of this that we know in all, it's in the way, but in all our articulations, all areas of articulation. Yes. Now, I think maybe we're enigma variations. We're variations without a theme, and we're always generating new variations, almost as in the same way that a sculptor is chiseling away at a block, looking for the form that is somehow there. And when we come together and when we share our thinking, when we share our ideas, and even when we claim that our ideas are the only way of looking at it, that is the process we need to be engaging in. It's an educational process. It's a process of learning, of conversing with one another. And I think that is the most inspiring thing about what I've seen at Anpa over the last 2 weeks, is the extent to which people are listening to each other and conversing with one another. And our search for the theme, our search for themes in this way is just another way of expressing our search for meaning. And that's a final comment, that if we are searching for meaning, our search for meaning requires nothing to be constructed. We need the zero, because without it, there is no pattern. There's nothing to go on. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation, but I want to also look at a different kind of theme and variation. So John Cage in the 60s, sorry, I'm wrong. It was the 50s. He wrote a set of pieces called Imaginary Landscapes, and Imaginary Landscape number 4 features a set of radios. Each performer has a radio. I'll send a YouTube of this thing around. And I was thinking, well, actually, and what Cage did was he said, okay, so there is a score, and it instructs people to tune in to various things and to sort of go wild with the tuning dial and change the volume and all sorts of things. So I'm thinking, well, actually, we can do this in Zoom. Now, I don't have any control, I don't have any control of people's volume, but I can ask you all to make a noise. And I can then start to select which noises I might want to hear in a piece. And of course, you could do this as well, but I'm going to operate as the selection mechanism for now. We can choose which noises we want to hear and which noises we don't want to hear, and then start to put these things together. Now, I haven't really... This is complete sort of improvisation, you understand, but I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see everybody. And if you can turn your cameras on. And turn your microphones on. Oh, that's good. And some people have got some feedback, which is really great. That's exactly what we want.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Okay. So, all right, well, let's just have a go at this. So can everybody make a noise? I love it. Okay. Okay, that's interesting. It's absolute chaos, but it comes over. Now, what I've got to do, I realize now what I've got to do is I need to be able to control who is unmuted and who isn't unmuted. So now what I can only do is ask you to unmute. So if I ask you to unmute, can you just, so if I, John Hyatt, where are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you're there, but so I'm going to mute you, and now I'm going to ask you to unmute, and then just be, yeah, that's it. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start in silence. I will bring people in slowly. So as I bring people in, you'll get a message to ask you to unmute, and you can contribute to the piece. I may then mute you again, and then bring in other people, and we'll try and construct something like that. Okay, is that right? Let's try it. Right, so I'm going to mute everybody. Here we go. Okay, so who should we start with? Okay, here we go.
Ba-ba-ba-bum.
Very good.
Everybody loves somebody. Fine. Everybody loves
only has meaning in contrast to nothing. The music only has meaning in contrast to nothing. Music only has meaning in contrast to nothing. The music only has meaning in contrast to nothing. The music only has meaning.
That's it. Okay,
Whoa.
well, we'll play it back in a minute and see see what it's like. You can unmute yourselves. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Okay, so who's going to chair me?
Like, you can chair yourself.
I have to chair myself. Okay, any questions? I hope that was understandable. I can't see who wants to ask a question.
Like Andrew's glass, resonant glass thing, that was good.
Who's the only one with a Mac? You have a Mac, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've turned the noise cancelling off. Everybody else can't do that.
There's background noise.
I think it's who is it?
It's Lou.
Is it Lou? Lou, I'm going to mute you. Oh, that's better. Okay.
Mark, I have a question. You said some of the thoughts, research lines or whatever are coming together. And in a way you mentioned Rowland's as a sort of reference. Could you discuss just one or two of the lines of research which you think are coming together?
Well, I think, you know, this week we've seen a number of presentations around quaternions, just as an example. And obviously, Lou, you've also talked about that quite extensively. It seems to me that there is something, I mean, the way that the nilpotent derives or can be expressed through the quaternions, to me was a revelation, and it made me realize that nothing is constructed, and the construction of nothing seems to me to be a very important thing in our understanding of construction and constructivism, because many people, and constructivism obviously is everywhere, and particularly in education, which is my field, but everybody thinks that what's constructed is stuff. And I'm not convinced that stuff is constructed. I think nothing is constructed. And it's through the construction of nothing that we see stuff.
When you say you construct nothing, I think you mean that we construct clearings in which we can make constructions.
Yes.
And it isn't mysterious. It isn't so mysterious as to require algebra, but there is algebra associated with that.
Yeah. Yeah. The algebra made it clearer to me that this was something that we could rationalize.
In laws of form.
Yeah.
The law of crossing says that when you make a crossing again, it's not the value of the crossing. And so from something you get nothing by crossing again. But the nothings that you are dealing with are clearings that you made.
Yeah.
Or clearings that you encountered.
Is that the unwritten cross, Lou?
Well, that's a construction. I'm talking about something very simple. You clear your desk in order to think. You take a a sheet of paper that's blank and begin to work on it. You take an unformed piece of clay and you begin to work on it. You, as a human being, you do this. It's something that we do. We start with things that are not things. We start with nothings and work them into somethings. And that's a really important aspect of constructing.
Can I make
I
another
think that's
shot?
what Mark is saying.
Yeah.
Mark, can I make another shot? Assuming that we buy Aristotle and his four causes, we're mainly dwelling on the material and the efficient.
Yeah.
I think there's more to do with the final and the form.
Yes.
And in that sense, the purpose of the research, not how it's done on the tools that we use, is surely what's coming together. I mean, I would say in that sense, Joe pointed out that he's working on stuff to do with the common good. And that was echoed in the Pierre Noy's statement of purpose.
Yeah.
So you see what I mean? At that level, we've got merging, not just the who's doing what and what tools are we using.
Yeah, I think so. But you have to be careful with purpose, because I mean that was had that quote at the beginning with Stafford Beer. The purpose of a system is what it does, and how do we? In a sense, it's a question of perception. And you know, Bohm was very keen to point out science was a perceptual enterprise. It wasn't about knowledge; it was about perception. So I wonder about purpose and imputing purpose into systems which we perceive.
I think you're displaying your addiction to Newtonian thinking, where purpose and teleology was banished.
Okay.
But a living system's purpose is to keep itself alive, and I think they missed that.
Okay. Okay, so John's got his hand up. John Torday?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of freaked out when Peter first started talking about the nilpotent, because it just seemed to me so nihilistic, not to be punny about it, but it just seemed very ominous until, at least in my way of thinking, I think the nilpotent is that that moment when we went from energy to matter. And that's really what's happening. And so, for example, when I said the other day, the bridge between the implicate and the explicate is we're always experimenting. We're always trying to find our path away from the nil point towards something. So anyway, yeah.
I wonder if that is the ontological theatre. And
Yeah,
whether...
Go ahead.
Well, whether that is the process that, you know, that is the empirical process. It's that active engagement with nature.
Yes, and so what I was waiting for you to say, that you didn't say, but I'll say it, is that at least in my own reduction of all of this, I end up at the first principles of physiology. So the purpose, as my corner was suggesting, is for life to maintain itself, but it's always referencing those first principles, particularly negative entropy, which Schrodinger said was the animus, the life form. I'm sorry, the life form driving force.
Doug and then Lou.
Okay, so I'll ask this as a tongue-in-cheek statement / question, but I want your response. So if you were, assume there's a God for a second and it wanted to create the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So it was essentially, it's trying to go from the abstract of nothing to something. What would God use? And my conclusion is bits is sort of the foundation of anything, because we don't know of anything that's close to a mark, is closest to anything else. And if you have bits, then you can simulate everything else, you know. So maybe you could care to comment about that the universe is like a simulator, the multiverse is like running on a simulator, and that simulator is bits. But she asked, well, if God had bits, he could do everything else because he would be all knowing and all powerful. I mean, I'm not a religious guy, but I use that language just to poke our inquiry about that subject. So
I suppose I'm more interested in wholes rather than bits. And music is my reference point, really. And I think music isn't in bits. It's in wholes.
I think when the explicate began with life, it put the bit in our mouths, and it has left us there to maintain ourselves.
Mark, when you say
Bits
whole,
are in physics and mathematics, so it's not like they don't exist. And we know they're physical. So, but
Mark, when you say whole,
in conjunction with the nothingness,
is it with a W?
I think what you're saying,
W.
Mark. So.
W, but the H is a very interesting one too. Lou.
I guess I want to start with the bits. The bits, after all, Doug, I think you really mean qubits. And the qubits are not like the old computer bits. They are global. And they're closer to something like just a distinction. Yes. They involve the whole universe, the qubit. And so it's quite different. And one needs to think further about what a qubit really means. Things are built out of qubits, perhaps. Yeah. Now, things are built out of distinctions. Again, those are wholes. Those are arisings of a consciousness and a notion of something being different at once. And I don't know what the relationship is between qubits and bits. I mean, qubits and distinctions. Well, I have to think about that.
I think you and I can have a conversation about that.
Yes, we can.
We can. Are more like a distinction than anything else, and you also have the whole of nothing, as in which they come out of, and how they combine, and that's also so. Anyhow.
And what I had started to remark on was the nilpotent. It helps to remember that Peter's nilpotent comes from the relativistic equation involving energy, momentum, and mass. Yeah. Energy squared equals momentum squared plus mass squared. Yeah. That is the nilpotent. Reformulated, it turns into the nilpotent. Okay. Somehow the Pythagorean theorem is at the base of everything, but it's a new version of the Pythagorean theorem, more like a qubit than an old style Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah.
That's where I really understood it, was with the Pythagoras. And I think once I understood it there, I spent some time with Peter because I was banging my head against this thing and I couldn't. I mean, my algebra is terrible. But once it sort of everything disappeared, you realize, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'm going to talk about on Wednesday is Pythagoras theorem. Is a distance metric. You can think of it, but you can also revisit it, renormalize that to say, oh, it's a correlation, because you could think of something is if they are more similar in their characteristics and the pieces are made up of their dimensional characteristics, and they're closer to each other. But you can formulate that as an inner product. So inner product and correlation and distance metrics are all related geometrically, and I can show that mathematically. So realize that anytime you're talking about inner products or distance, it just depends on your perspective of where you're doing that computation. Oh, an inner product and correlation distance metric almost have the same mathematical forms. They're the squares of some things, right? Either differences or sums and things like that. So just realize that those are mathematically all related. So and if you start thinking about all of that in a high dimensional space, then all of a sudden you start thinking about the universe is like a big CDMA, sparse, CDMA is what they use for our wireless phones. It's allowing you to have spread spectrum idea applied at the quantum level or at the bit level. And so that's, it allows you to combine things in superposition that normally wouldn't be mathematical. So here the implicate, the mathematics, connects with the physical, the explicit, through this translation between the mathematics having these properties.
Hey Mark, aren't they having the meeting that they will be having in the future now?
Sorry?
Come again?
Doug and Lou are having the meeting now rather than postponing it until somebody like Nicola has dragged us back to the final purpose or something.
All right.
Yeah. That's what I want to get to. And you're right, Mike. That's what I'd like to talk
Okay.
about.
Christine's got a question.
Okay, I did have my hand up.
I'm
wasn't
sorry, I'm
waving-
really crap at chairing. I'm even worse at chairing my own chat session.
No. It's difficult to tell whether I'm waving, drowning, or dancing.
I know, yeah, I know the feeling. Yeah, Christine.
I just wanted to say a few things because I found it so wonderful and interesting. And the first thing was that I think it's been suggested that the more people play like that, they start randomly, is it, in your opinion, that they pull together and sort of create a sort of more order in relation to each other, that they're almost prone to do that? And I think that orchestras have shown that when they're random and then they pull together. Yeah. And then I thought Norbert Wiener's cybernetic work was called The Human Use of Human Beings, funny enough, isn't it? And there's something there in the way that music that you showed pulls together like that. But having said that, I think that the whole surrealist movement, and I feel safe to go, you went to the Pompidou Center and you're in France, and I feel safe to mention French surrealism a bit at least, because in a way I think it's more that we're falling apart together rather than coming together. All the surrealist things are, in a sense, obviously orderly in one sense, but they're trying to stretch or to the point where you can see things falling apart. Yeah. And I've got three, just very quickly, stop me if it's too much, but three examples of that. The surrealist movement, which in France said that surprise was the normal, you know, that ordinary things are weird, but it's surprise that is the norm, that the true surrealist expects surprise, which kind of goes into a thing. But when you think of some of the key works, that they're trying hard to show dissolution, abolition, disorder, and interaction with the viewer to the extent that the work can have no intentionality that stands out, that is always, that comes to a head with Mallarmé, doesn't it, with his great poem, as Andrew knows, I'm sort of obsessed with it, but its title is Un coup de dés n'abolira jamais le hasard. A throw of the dice, Andrew, can never abolish chance. And obviously that poem is written that so many multiple combinations happen in the viewer. So it's this stress on the viewer again. But the first thing I thought of was Marcel Duchamp, who has the large glass, because that is almost made of dust and cobwebs and broken cracks and things. And part of it is a sort of Heath Robinson machine, because you were talking about that, the chocolate grinder, you know, in the different sections. And I think that Duchamp's work is very interesting, that it fits in, it's almost in the interstices. I mean, to talk of the between state, that Derrida always uses things happening in a, not a binary way, but in a between state, a sort of hymenopteron membrane, and that things happen. And many of these works of art seem to be in that between state. Duchamp trying to foreground all the time that it's a work of art and constructed, and therefore has its own changing parameters and so on, can't be, it's creating a form of orderly chance, isn't it? But just to sort of draw it to a close, sorry, because there's so much, but because the architectural influence that I know you have, that Derrida was asked with, is it Peter Weizmann, Peter Stegner, the one that did the Jewish Museum, I forget his name, and they were...
Libeskind.
Yes.
Libeskind, yeah.
Yes, in Paris, they were given money to create a public building which brought out some of these concepts of disorder and dissolution for the public to enter. And it's just, it didn't actually work out because the money ran out, but Derrida called it the sieve and the lyre. And so that's the sieve, because memory and time can only be presented as a sieve. We can't even, there's no present, it's always over before you have it. You know, we live in the future anterior rather than in the future or the past, I think, in this domain where there's no before or after, but these images of time that is cinders and dissolving all the time. So, and then he has the sieve and the lyre, which is a musical thing. And in a way, it's like an image of memory with the wind blowing through it, which is like this extreme tension of an orderly work of art trying to convey dissolution. Anyway, I won't go on anymore, but there's so much that you've triggered through the very powerful resonant talk.
I wonder if it's very interesting with the work of Cage and a lot of the sort of a lot of 20th century art, really.
Yeah.
It demands so much of the observer to bring coherence to what is seen. It challenges us, you know, in the way that Victorian art and you know, art music of the 19th century doesn't do, unless you're Beethoven. That, although one could be critical and say, well, this isn't art, actually that question has to be resolved in us. It has to be resolved in us.
Yeah. Just one more thing, the potential is the word there, because the Surrealists had a workshop, you know, Oulipo means a workshop of literary potential. Valigny writes virtual fictions. It's the stress on the, not on the actual, but the potential, where all these, I think art lives in the potential, just to add that to you. Thank you.
Okay, Nicola. And yeah,
Sorry, yeah, sure. Yeah, I was going to say something about purpose again, but I'm just wondering about this name Oulipo, because Peter Kingsley writes very interestingly on Parmenides and Pythagoras as healers, and they were healers really more than teachers, that was the primary purpose. And of course, actually that brings me back to purpose in a way, because in a way that's a question again of our overriding purpose with respect to, you know, why are we doing all this? We are drawn to it. Each of us is drawn to some, you know, some area of study but it's something in us. It's our life, our spirit, I would say, you know, spirit or soul, or, you know, the human part of us that is not explained in any normal materialist scientific way, that we are drawn to something. And this is obviously, you know, the emotional power of music, etc., and art. This between we are always in the middle. I obviously share more with Derrida than I thought I did. So in a way, to actually want to have answers about, you know, where does it all come from, for me is kind of like, it's okay to ask that, but not to actually really expect that one's ever going to get an answer. One, you know, this, you know, the thing of the redundancy, you know, life is overdetermined. There are lots of different explanations. It was one of my, you know, sort of moments of absolute wonder early on in Anpa, when there were, I mean, this, I don't remember who it was. It was a woman who came over from America, but I mean, we have these different scientists who all can have these very different theories that correspond to incredibly complex data, and yet, this is what we are in. And so I think you know, it was very nice. It was very interesting that you had 5 levels, Mark, and the 5. You see,
arbitrary, but yes, okay.
I know it seemed arbitrary. That's it. I mean, and you know, Vanessa has put on the chat. It's really beautiful about Indian music with pentameric scales, which have different notes on the rising and the return downwards, and the fact that the 5 is the broken symmetry. These, you know, so I think it is beautiful. You know, so Pythagoras is so key. I mean, you know, it's obviously the Pythagorean comma, but well, actually, I mean, which comes from the you know, the cycle of fifths, and so this is, you know, my return to how key the numbers are in this, but how important it is that we are not just looking, saying, well, you know, well, how does it all start? Let's use but kind of, well, what is pulling us? And it is the wholeness, which, and of course, healing is whole making. That's the, you know, etymological meaning of healing is whole making. And obviously, we know that what our world needs now is healing. And what so many of us need, we all need healing, but some people, you know, there are a lot of broken people by the system. This system has created a lot of broken people.
Yeah,
so I'm coming back to saying, yes, let's remember, balance that with, you know, where we are going. I mean, you know, even with your work, John, I think that's, you know, the kind of, you know, well, with any of this work that is kind of looking at fundamental stuff, which is really good, it's actually, well, you know, where does it lead in the larger picture? Anyway, that's enough. Also,
I think one of the things that strikes me is, and Bohm is onto this, he's very, this comment about Bohr and the consistency and coherence between the form of expression and the content of expression. That's a statement about self-awareness of scientists. That he's saying, look, you've got to listen to each other, because actually we go to conferences and we don't listen to each other. This is where his interest in dialogue really stems from. And I think that's been the wonderful thing about this conference for me. And maybe it's the online medium, it's something, but people have been listening to each other. I find that very helpful.
Can I say something, please?
Yes, Wolfgang.
Okay, I want to get back to your original presentation because it was very similar to systems that I have built, in the sense that, and if I can figure it out, I'm going to try to share my screen to show you a slide. Share, since you've taught me how to do this. Now, if you guys can see this, this is a system I built down at Git, and what it's based on is the concept that if I build a computer that knows the world, and I've built these things because I was an expert at building terrain databases for the Department of Defense here. And the way it works is that the computer generates the expectation of what an unmanned aerial vehicle would see out in the world. It then takes an input from such an unmanned aerial vehicle, you know, in other words, your eyeball in the sky, right? And compares it with what the computer expects to see. The difference between that then generates an update to the information that the computer thinks he has, and specifically turns around and then produces actions of the machine to do. So I've got surprise, because if something is in the view of the unmanned aerial vehicle, then it would not be in the computer, it would be a surprise. And it's precisely what you were saying, it's the surprises we were looking for. In other words, an empty road that suddenly had a terrorist. I don't want to get into DoD applications here, but that's what the idea was, is to have a database of knowledge of what we normally expect. The process then produces nothing if your expectation is exactly matched out in the world. It produces differences, and it's those differences and surprises that then become the actional display, which I think you called the theater, that one then reacts to. So this system has been built, we've tried it, we run UAVs, and I have a patent on it. And it's almost identical to, I think, what you put together in slides. So, you know, I think you've got the concept. We've done some physical implementation of these things, and we've got a big match here. So thank you. So I'm going to off this.
Question for Wolfgang.
Yeah.
Are you describing the self-driving cars?
This would be, and I have suggested it, but the self-driving cars are more based on Boolean algebra, which is, you know, which I believe is the wrong way to go, because it's it requires intelligence of people. This algorithm that we've developed doesn't require a lot of intelligence. It just requires very, very high raw compute power, because the algorithm is very simple. All you're doing is saying, in a self-driving car, you would say, have the car in its memory know what the future, what it's expecting to see. And any difference, you know, in other words, it's expecting to see an empty space in front of it. If there's a difference, that might be a car, and that would be a surprise, and then an action has to be taken. And I'll make one more comment, and this is very, very, very important, at least from my point of view, because I have studied and given lectures on quantum computers. A qubit is a dynamic thing. That's why you have to have the I in it. A bit is a static thing. A qubit is the dynamics between two statics.
Okay.
You can build a qubit, and I've done it for my students. You can build a qubit out of a box, like Mark did in a lecture a long time ago here, but you can build a qubit out of simply some oscillations, springs, and a little ball inside a box, and it will oscillate in two normal modes. You know, and you can watch it, and from the outside it'll either be in a zero state, in other words, it's static, or it moves slightly, which is in another mode. So we have to understand that the difference between classic physics is that in classic physics it's the state that's the issue, and the bit is the bit of state, a 5 volts in a computer. A qubit is the dynamics between two states. So I'll just say that, because I don't think most people really try to identify what's actually going on in the world relative to their symbols and their theories, and it's very important. But
So
okay,
is it correct to say a qubit is a process?
yes.
Right.
So what about novelty? What if it were a bunny rabbit? Would the system recognize it?
It would, well, there's, the answer is no. I mean, if it's got a rabbit inside of its database so that it can have something then to identify with, and yes, it would identify it, possibly. If not, it would be in a state of ambiguity. And you can actually do lots of experiments like this. You know, if you show somebody a picture that they recognize, they instantly recognize it, and they instantly say, "Oh, I can understand. This is a tree." If you show them a picture that's ambiguous, then often actually they are in state of fluctuation. In other words, you know, like a, oh, you know, the Hecker cube or any of these things, you know, where the thing is for you or against you, or the old lady versus the young lady, you know, your mind will just flip back and forth between two possibilities and be in this state of ambiguity. But if it recognizes it, then it stabilizes, and you have one three-dimensional world. You know.
So it has to be relevant, and the machine.
You have to have a database. I used to make a living building database for the Army until that goddamn Google people, they gave everything away for free and really wrecked my business. But you have to have a database, and that's well, I'll make one other comment. It's not a question of survival. It's a question of growth. We don't want to survive. We want to grow.
Yeah.
Okay?
Absolutely.
It's not survival. If our goal is survival, we're going to die because at some point we'll make a little mistake. Let's try to grow.
Yeah.
But where I was going was that the system is not curious. So, you know, curiosity distinguishes this system from the human mind, or from, you know, what we think, because that rabbit may be concealing a weapon, for example, right?
Yeah, armed bodies.
Yeah, well, that's true. But well, you know, the point of these systems is something like the most obvious application is surveillance. You have a UAV and it goes along, and you have an idea of what its perimeter is supposed to be, and then everything that is prized sends up a flag, and someone can look at it in more detail. You know, that kind of thing. You know, because the biggest problem we have in DoD is boredom.
Yeah. Wolfgang, is this what kind of AI have you got sitting behind this?
It's not a lot of AI. All it is a simple algorithm that says, I'm going to generate out into my computer an expectation. So these pictures here in the middle, they are the pictures that are generated by the computer, and they generate what we think the unmanned aerial vehicle is looking at, seeing. So as far as AI is concerned, I'm not sure if you calculate it. It's straightforward calculation. The UAV sends you a signal of where it is and where it's looking, and what its camera parameters are, and you generate the picture it should see from a computer. Now, in order to do this, I had to develop what probably was the biggest parallel processing system that actually did something.
Okay.
But we did it, and so in real time we would generate the picture that an aerial vehicle would see, beat the two together, and find out the differences. The differences then were the actual information that we were looking for. Now, if there were a rabbit there with a machine gun, you're right, probably we wouldn't have a structure in the database, and the system would be kind of ambiguous. And as all of these systems are, you go back to the human. You know, at some point you have to go and say, oops, you know, what I think computer science is called the altar function, you know, where you go back to the operator and say, hey, I don't know what's going on. But, you know, that's how the system was built. So if we found a rabbit with a machine gun, I think it would fall back to the operator.
It is very interesting.
We had that program.
It is very interesting. Because obviously, Daniel Dubois' work is computing anticipatory systems.
Exactly.
And
so
in another life, I was just to say, in another life,
I'm just saying, we've built something which looks very much like an implementation of the ideas that you presented. So I just wanted to let you know that.
In another life, I do a lot of work with convolutional neural networks in image processing, and it strikes me that there is something of an anticipatory system in many of the sort of image processing AIs that we've got now. The problem is that we don't really know how they work. It's something of a mystery. it would seem that it's fractal in some way, but it's not fractal in the way that perhaps human consciousness is. And that there are important differences between humans. And I wonder again, Peter, I think probably has a handle on how they're different.
When you say fractal, are you emphasizing the notion that the fractal contains encoded with itself?
Yes.
That's the part of what fractal meaning you're using.
Well, I think it certainly seems to be scale invariant in various ways. Now, I mean, the pictures that I'm generating are not really fractals. They're messy pictures, really. They're alternative descriptions of a phenomenon. I suppose the theory might lead us to think, well, maybe it's messy because you haven't got enough variables, or you're not looking at the right variables, or maybe our selection of meaning is a search for something which makes more sense as a more coherent fractal.
You know, Hofstadter has said again and again that his point that he's been trying to make across all his books is that meaning arises out of syntax. And I always resisted that. And then I began to understand that maybe he wasn't talking about part of it, which is the human in the loop. Because when you think of, for example, improvising music, it's all syntax, but there are human beings in that loop, and they are making choices, and they're part of the whole flow of it, which becomes meaningful for them.
Yes.
And so the locus of meaning ends up being at the human level,
yes.
Wherever you look for it. But Hofstadter was struck by something else. He was struck by the incompleteness that says that the completely meaningless Principia Mathematica system is also incomplete, and that incompleteness is a fact about it, which is due to its syntax interacting with its interpretant. And he, like many computer scientists, doesn't want to put the human being in the loop. But I understood my argument with him that way, that the human being is always in the loop. And then I can say, yes, meaning arises out of syntax.
The human being's always in the loop. Yes, exactly. Yeah. You can't get rid of them.
This is what I gained from Leidersdorf. He put me towards, pointed me towards the work of Alfred Schutz, who wrote a wonderful paper in 1951 called "Making Music Together." And Lou, I'll send you this, and I'll send you the paper that we've just published in Systems Research and Behavioral Science, because our paper is imperfect, but Schutz's paper is beautiful, and it's all about the human, and it's all about anticipation.
What if you interject negative entropy, as I was suggesting, as the proxy for the human? It's all about the negative versus the positive entropy. So that would solve the problem, no?
The problem of...
Can I say something?
Peter Master's been waiting.
Yeah, Peter Master, sorry, Peter.
Well, I just wanted to say that if you want to see something now at work and is an everyday occurrence, particularly to women, it concerns looking at a mother to see her baby before it's being born at various stages of respirators, and you use acoustic holograms for that. And you are able to exercise a dynamic control by which allows you to see the movement of the baby in the womb. Indeed, I have a picture of my grandson 2 weeks before he was born, from inside his mother, and of course it's a still of a dynamic picture, and he is easily recognizable even today as the baby in the picture.
Yeah.
Could I just make a very brief comment about fractals because it involves the great thinker John Amson. And so it would be my honor just to quote him as if he were here for a moment. Well, because I work on Valerie, there was a conference in St Andrews called Musique, Mathematics and Mysticism. And John Amson was invited to talk about Valerie's mathematics. And he was sort of fluffing around a bit, and suddenly it came to fractals. And he sort of made just a sort of spontaneous remark that he thought that fractals and self-similarity was going to be the language of mysticism. And this caused a great lot of discussion, because what he meant by that, he didn't mean a transcendental mysticism, like a mysticism without God, if anything. He was meaning that things that you can't always say in language had sort of almost idealized, go into a kind of infinity, and that fractals sort of replicated the impossibility of saying things precisely except through repetition and, as somebody said, inside outside containing itself, like a self-enacting system outside language. But it's my honor to say that it's the great John Amson, as I said.
Thank you. Divyaman.
Yeah, I just had a short comment. I mean, thank you so much for playing the piano. It was really nice to hear.
Yes.
Especially.
Did it sound all right?
Yes, it sounded really good, actually, surprisingly, given the internet connection and stuff. But it was good. So I wanted to share something about just music cognition, a very basic truth that we know, where if you play a note on the piano, then you know how the partials come along with the fundamental frequency. However, if you remove the fundamental frequency and you play all the other tones, you still have the illusion that the fundamental frequency is still there.
Yes.
You can still hear it even if it's not there.
Yes.
So that was kind of interesting to recall right now, where I'm like, okay, wait, this is an example of how you can have a lot of distinctions without having the fundamental distinction. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I just wanted to share that, see how people respond to that.
I completely agree. And what I sometimes do when I've presented this kind of thing before is I haven't got it on my computer now, but I have a real-time audio spectrum analyzer, and I get people to sing a note, and of course you get multiple levels of frequency, showing up in the spectrum analyzer, and I think it's an example of a kind of synchronic redundancy, and we don't need all of those. We don't need all of those frequencies playing for us to know what note is. But the more you overlay multiple frequencies, the richer the sound is, the more real it feels. It's the difference between the transistor radio and the full hi-fi, and it's such a beautiful example to illustrate, I think, something that David Bohm was saying about the nature of reality and the nature of multiple descriptions of the world and how we construct reality. Peter Master.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, yeah. But you're always emphasizing the nature of the human being and the observer. But in the example I've just given you, there needn't be an observer. There has to be an observer to do the diagnosis and see the baby. But basically, the holographic thing, the picture would appear on the screen of the apparatus without any human intervention whatsoever. So you don't need the observer in acoustic quantum holography, essentially, is the universe itself, because the actual images extend in principle over the whole universe, but they're just concentrated mainly in a small space that you're looking at.
That raises the possibility of many other modes of appreciation of the image.
Yes. Well, of course. I mean, if you are a something like a bat or a dolphin looking at the same thing, and you saw it, you wouldn't see you wouldn't recognize it. The being, the organism that was doing it would have an entirely different understanding of what it was.
That's a very profound. I've got to think about that, Peter.
But that's the thing that we all see, don't we? We all, as far as I'm concerned, we all see the picture. So how do we get the hologram? It's easy to know how to get the hologram of what I'm looking at into my brain. That I can explain. But why is the image of what I'm looking at on the light that was there in the first place? And the only reason it was there is because I needn't be there to see it. Anybody could be there to see it. And it's there because the universe put it there.
Rilke has that. There's some lovely things that Rainer Maria Rilke says. I mean, yeah. So he talks about, is the purpose of my life? Am I here, just to hear that violin playing at absolutely that moment? So this is again the moment, and this is between the implicate and the explicate, and the moments of bridging that we create.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
If I could just say there that I thought of the old anthropocentrism, where man is at the center of the universe, and obviously we sort of moved right away from that. But it's interesting in relation to what Nicola said, that another form of almost like anthropocentrism without a teleology, a completely different form of it has come back in. That I think there's this strange theory that we might only be at the point where we can only see the universe in that way because we see it that way. And in a way, that is a very important link between a limit and a possibility, because that's where we are. So it reads like a form of anthropocentrism in a different sense, if you see what I mean.
Well, I think in all these things, if you look at the images which come out of a magnetic resonance imaging machine, you can tell from them that the process of forming the image as a diffraction pattern from the diffraction pattern is essentially the diffraction pattern is of the whole is of the image that you want, but it also extends to infinity.
Okay. Peter, thank you. yeah, I'm kind of blown away by that comment, really. John Torday, and then I'm going to break up my own party.
It's full surrealist for you. It's your party. You can cry if you want to.
No, it's all right. I'm not going to cry. It's like I'll be very glad. I'm going to get drunk. I'm going.
Why not? Well, I think John's more or less said something like that. That everything comes from more or less that comes from the universe. That's how all our physiology. That's where all the human physiology comes from. And didn't you say something like that, John?
Okay.
Well, it was more the chemistry of the physiology.
Well,
but to address what Nicola and Christine were saying, I am of the opinion. So my work came to fruition only because I could collapse phylogeny and ontogeny, because they're both based on the same mechanistic principle. But what I would want to say was that, as Nicola was saying, it's that bridge between the explicate and the implicate, and that only occurs through experimentation. So it's that intersection of certain experimental results. It's like synesthesia. If you can, hear color or see, whatever. I mean, it's kind of like that, but all of a sudden it becomes logical, because things intersect in a way which all of a sudden, and they repeat. That's important too. So the redundancy.
But in my universe, when the tree falls in the forest, and there's nobody there to hear it, there's still the noise takes place, because it's part of the it's part of and inseparable from the universe, the physical universe itself.
Yeah,
I just
so you
wanted
could
to thank John Torday for his comment that the other day to me, that experimentation fires, or was it drives his creativity. I think that was a good way to put it, if that's what he intended.
Okay, we need to stop. It's long enough. Monday, Roger, what are you going to talk about?
Yeah, hi. I'll be talking about the ether, and some people say the ether exists, and some people say it doesn't. And so I'm looking at it from, I think, relativity has not been properly understood because his wife was a co-author on it, and I think that's been overlooked.
Okay.
So I hope to show a video of the professor saying that I think his wife was co-author on it. So I think this is one of the reasons why relativity has not been properly understood.
Okay. All right. So that's to look forward to. On Tuesday, we've got John Hyatt, who's going to vibrate information. And I think we're looking forward to another great week next week. So thank you all for coming. I feel. What?
Could I just ask, Roger, have you got the ether kind of materializing around your head in blue? I just wonder what.
This is the wonder of AI.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
A computer version of
Okay.
ether.
Yeah. This
All
is,
right, yeah.
this is the future. Anyway, thank you ever so much for coming and for participating. I will send a video round. I will be extremely embarrassed, and I'll send a recording of the audio.
The music we made.
Yes. It was interesting. It was interesting. I did think, could I just ask people to randomly browse stuff on YouTube instead? But well, maybe if I get another opportunity, I'll try that. But thank you ever so much, and have a great weekend, and see you next week.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank
bye-bye.
you.
Bye,
Thank you, Mark.
Wonderful. Bye.
Bye.